The organizational meeting of the board. Today is Wednesday, January 5th, and the time is 6:02. We're going to start with agenda item A, oath of office, for the re-elected and new Board of Education members, Rhonda Crawford, Tina Davis, and Leah Travis. Mr. Odh, would you call the meeting to order, please?
Thank you. So for the oath of office, we need the three members to stand up and raise your right hand. And I'll read the oath, and you can just at the end just say I will. Hopefully. I will hereby affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties as an elected member of the Twinsburg City School District Board of Education, Summit County, Ohio, to the best of my ability and in accordance with the laws now in effect and hereafter be enacted during my continuance in said office.
I will.
All right. Welcome aboard.
Appreciate that, thank you. And with item C, and with that, we are going to pause the meeting for photo ops, and then we'll continue on. officially call the meeting to order. Mr. Ahill, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Crawford.
Here.
Mr. Curtis.
Here.
Mrs. Davis.
Here.
Mrs. Travis.
Here. Okay, and we are all here. Item D, approval of agenda and addendum items.
There are no changes to the
And-
organizational.
No changes, I assume, Ms. Powers.
Correct.
Thank you. All right. Motion to move, please?
No, we just moved
Oh,
on
we
to
just,
item
that's
D.
right, sorry. Mr. Ahill, would you call the roll?
No, we just move on. Just go ahead
Oh,
and read the
that's right,
nominations.
sorry. And on to E, the organization of the board for 2022. 1, nominations for the office of the president of the Twinsburg Board of Education for 2022 and to serve as president pro tem at the next year's organizational meeting until the 2023 president is elected. And I do nominate Mark Curtis for president.
I second.
Okay. Okay. And number 2, election for president for 2022 would be Mark Curtis. Okay. Mr. Ayo, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Crawford.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Travis.
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes,
That item passes 4-0.
thank you.
And welcome to the seat.
Thank you.
And 3, nominations for the office of Vice President of the Twinsburg Board of Education for 2022.
I would like to nominate Tina Davis.
Second.
Okay, second by Leah Travis. Mr. Aho, number 4, election of Vice President for 2022. That would be me, Tina Davis. Mr. Aho, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Crawford.
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes,
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Travis.
Yes.
All right, that item passes 4-0.
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And
Okay.
taking over.
I'll take over presiding over the meeting. We'll move on to item 5, order of voting of motions and resolutions for 2022. Use of Robert's Rules of Order. The member making the motion is called first. The member seconding the motion is called next. Vice President called second last, and the President called last in alphabetical order when possible. Robert's Rules of Order shall prevail in determining all board meetings procedural questions. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crawford.
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Travis.
Yes.
Item passes 4-0. We'll move on to item E, Treasurers and Superintendent's Business. E1, resolve that the Board of Education dispense with the reading of the board minutes of each regular and special meeting provided they are delivered to the board members at least 2 days prior to the board meeting where approval is anticipated. 2, and further resolve that the superintendent and treasurer do internal appropriation modifications whenever necessary under provisions of the purchasing and other financial policies of the district and under Ohio law. 3, and further resolved to appropriate a $10,000 service fund account in 2022. 4, and further resolved to authorize the treasurer to make payments of the 2022 installment for the faithful performance bond covering the board members, superintendent, and business manager in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code. 5, and to further resolve to grant the superintendent and her designee authority to file applications for all projects considered desirable for the Twinsburg City School District. 6, and further resolve to authorize the signature of the treasurer or a facsimile thereof to be used on all checks and warrants. 7, and further resolve to designate the superintendent and her designee as purchasing agent for the Twinsburg City School District for 2022. 8, and further resolved to authorize the treasurer to invest funds whenever practical as permitted by law, either in short-term or long-term investments, and to give a report to the board. 9, and further resolved to authorize the treasurer to provide payments to employees for salaries and expenses and to suppliers for goods and services within appropriations. A check register will be presented to the board. 10, and further resolve that the treasurer's name will appear on all active accounts. 11, and further resolve that the budgetary level of authority is at fund object level for the general fund and at the fund level for all other funds. 12, and further resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education sets the payment for board members per the following schedule and will receive $100 per meeting for a maximum number of 36 meetings for the calendar year 2022. Excuse me. 13, and further resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education sets the day, time, and place for regular board meetings for the calendar year 2022. Day, first and third Wednesday of each month, with the following exceptions: June, first and fourth Wednesday of the month; July, only one board meeting; September, first and fourth Wednesday of this month; December, only one board meeting. The time, board meetings will be called to order at 7:00 p.m. The place, meetings of the Board of Education will be held at the Twinsburg Government Center or the Twinsburg High School Auditorium or LGI when the Twinsburg Government Center is not available. And further resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts any and all federal and state grant monies available to the district and to authorize the participation of staff members in any grant programs available to the district during the school year 2022-2023. 15, and further resolve to authorize the superintendent to employ personnel and accept resignations as needed during the calendar year 2022. Such employment and resignations will be reviewed by the Board of Education at its next regularly scheduled meeting. 16, and further resolve to recommend that the Twinsburg Board of Education appoint the treasurer, superintendent, business manager, and Peters, Kalale, and Markakis Company, LPA, as representatives to the Tax Incentive Review Council meetings at Summit County Department of Economic Development and the City of Twinsburg. 17, and further resolve to appoint Tina Davis as the delegate and Leah Travis as the alternate delegate to the Ohio School Boards Association 2022 Capital Conference. 18, and further resolve that the Akron Beacon Journal, the Plain Dealer, both daily newspapers of general circulation, and or the Twinsburg Bulletin be designated the official publications for legal notices. 19, and further resolve to appoint the Records Commission of the Twinsburg City School District for calendar year 2022, comprised of the President of the Board of Education, Superintendent, Business Manager, and Treasurer of the district. The Records Commission shall meet at least once each calendar year to establish rules and retention and disposal of records and to review same. 20, and further resolve that the Board of Education approves petty cash funds, building principal or designee and athletic director, coordinator of K-12 student activities, and request up to $300. Central office budgetary officer may request up to $200. Food service director may request up to $200 petty cash in addition to $360 change fund. Expenditures up to $25 may be made from petty cash. 21, and further resolve that the audit committee will consist of a member of the finance committee in addition to the superintendent and or designee and the treasurer. Do I have a motion to approve items E1 through 21?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Travis. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. On to item F, appointment of the Board of Education representatives on behalf of the Board of Education. F1, Finance Committee will be comprised of Mark Curtis and Leah Travis. 2, the Buildings and Grounds Committee will be comprised of Rhonda Crawford and Mark Curtis. 3, Curriculum and Technology Committee will be comprised of Rhonda Crawford and Leah Travis. 4, the Policy Committee will be comprised of Tina Davis and Leah Travis. 5, the Athletic and Student Activities Committee will be comprised of Rhonda Crawford and Tina Davis. And 6, the Business Advisory Council will be comprised of Mark Curtis and Tina Davis. The Legislative Liaison to the Ohio School Boards Association, Mark Curtis. And 8, Student Achievement Liaison to the Ohio School Boards Association, Rhonda Crawford. Do I have a motion to approve items F1 through 8?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Crawford. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Davis. Do I have any discussion? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes. Item passes 4-0. Next is item G, representation of legal counsel. Resolved to approve the following list of firms for legal counsel representation during 2022. Peter Kalale and Markakis Company, LPA. Squire, Patton and Boggs, attorneys at law. Retz, Paul and Shore, attorneys at law. And Retzel and Andrus, LPA. Additionally, the Ohio School Boards Association Legal Assistance Fund. Do I have a motion to approve item G?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second? I'm sorry, so moved by Mrs. Travis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Crawford. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. H, appointment of staff to positions for the 2022 year. 1, Title IV, hearing officer, business manager. 2, anti-harassment grievance officer, the director of human resources and/or the director of student wellness. 3, the 504 ADA compliance officer is the director of pupil services and/or the director of human resources. 4, non-discrimination and equal employment opportunity compliance officers, the director of human resources and/or the business manager. 5, civil rights coordinator, director of pupil services and/or the director of human resources. 6, homeless liaison, which is the director of pupil services. And 7, the suspension appeal officer as a designee of the board, superintendent or her designee. Do I have a motion for items H1 through 7?
So.
Okay, I'll go with Mrs. Crawford
Second.
and go with Mrs. Davis. This is second. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. Excuse me, we'll move on to item I, appointment of district records officer for the 2022 year. Resolved to recognize the administrative assistant to the superintendent as district records officer as established under Twinsburg City Schools Administrative Guidelines 8310A. The individual in this position will also serve as a Twinsburg City School District designee in this regard. Do I have a motion for I?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Travis. I gotta get used to that voice over there. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second, Mrs. Davis. Any discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes, and that item passes 4-0. Item J is a motion to adjourn. I will make the motion to adjourn the organizational meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Crawford. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Curtis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
All right, we're adjourned for the organizational meeting. Board of Education regular meeting. Today is Wednesday, January 5th. The time is 6:26. And I'm calling the meeting to order. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crawford,
Here.
Mr. Curtis,
Here.
Mrs. Davis,
Here.
Mrs. Travis.
Here.
Okay, we are all here. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to
Okay, I'm to understand that we do have some addendum items for the agenda. I'm trying to locate them. Are they in the packet? Okay, so I want to make a motion to make some additions for H1 with respect to contracts, and also H3 with respect to extracurricular staff. Do I have a motion to make the changes to the addendums to the agenda for items H1 and H3?
So moved.
All right, so moved by Mrs. Travis
Second.
and second by Mrs. Davis. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Travis,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis.
Yes. H1 and H3. All right, excellent. Okay, so we'll move on to item E, communications. I'll proceed with the President's report. Good evening, families of Twinsburg City Schools. I'm Mark Curtis, and I'm honored to serve as your board president once again. I appreciate the vote of confidence from my colleagues that they've instilled in me, and I look forward to working with them. This evening marks the beginning of a new era for the Board of Education, as we have sworn in two new board members, Mrs. Rhonda Crawford and Mrs. Leah Travis, both of whom were elected this past November. I also want to congratulate the re-election of my colleague, Mrs. Tina Davis. Together, we hope to continue serving our schools and supporting our staff and students who have sacrificed so much these past 2 years. I'm hopeful that the winter break has allowed us all time to reflect, spend time with family and loved ones, and to recharge our batteries as we enter the next half of this school year. It goes without saying that we've been faced with extraordinary challenges throughout this year as we continue to deal with this global pandemic. The educational landscape has been forever changed due to the necessity to constantly adapt to this new learning environment. And I recognize that not all decisions that have been made by the board and administration are to the liking of all. However, please know and understand that we are doing the very best to make decisions that are in the best interest of all parties based on data provided by our local, state, and federal officials. I feel the need to reiterate the fact that none of us are professionals in this regard, and that we are being affected like everyone else. While it's certainly difficult to be put in a position to make these decisions, we do so with transparency and integrity. We remain hopeful that we will see ourselves through these challenging times and get back to some semblance of normalcy soon. We have much work to do in the coming months, and we will continue to keep you informed as we move forward. And as always, we will also continue to seek your feedback and consideration of decisions that are made to determine the future of our district. Please continue to be safe, Twinsburg family. I will now turn the meeting over to our superintendent, Mrs. Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Good evening, Board of Education. Good evening, members of our community who are watching on the live stream or later on the recording. To begin my report this evening, I would like to formally congratulate Mr. Curtis on his election as our new board president and to Mrs. Davis on her election as our new vice president. Also, congratulations once again to Mrs. Crawford and to Mrs. Travis for their election to our board. We look forward to working with all of you as you continue to support our students, our staff members, and our Tiger families. The new calendar year brings the period of remote learning for our students through January 14th. I've been in and out of the buildings this week, and it's just been wonderful to see how well engaged our students are virtually, as well as our staff members. And I recognize it's not the same thing as if the students were here on campus, and we wish that that could be the case. But we also know that we're doing all that we can as a school district to keep our students safe and to keep our staff members safe.
We continue to worry about staffing levels. On Monday of this week, we had 10 bus drivers out and we had 6 teachers out at Dodge. 10 bus drivers would have meant that our routes would have been extremely delayed and potentially our students would have not gotten to school till very late that morning. And so that was one of the reasons why we knew in the planning of this pivot out, we were very well aware of the fact that we were going to run into staffing issues. We had them immediately before winter break. We knew that we were going to have them after winter break as well. And so we're hoping this 2-week period of time allows this surge to settle down a little bit. And after that point, we're able to move forward in a much more healthy and safe environment for all. And hopefully our staff and students will be looking forward to coming back on campus in our classrooms and getting the second semester underway. I really want to thank our teachers and our administrators at the building levels, as well as my central office team. There are so many moving parts and pieces on any day of the school year in the regular sense. But when you're talking about learning remotely, it adds a whole nother layer of complication to an already complicated puzzle. And so I just want to say hats off to the men and women that support the children here in our school district. Whatever your role is, not only the teaching staff, our classified staff, you know, food service has been delivering breakfast and lunches. Our janitorial staff is really working hard over the next 2 weeks to polish up the buildings, because when you're worrying about sanitizing as much as we were doing when we were on campus, some things that are daily duties of our janitorial staff aren't getting done. So we're really using these 2 weeks to polish up the place. We've reassigned staff members who don't have responsibilities to supervise students. For example, our lunchroom playground staff have been reassigned to other duties. And they are on campus and just working hard. Could be in different jobs at this point, but still here supporting the Tiger family. So I thank all of the men and women that work for the Board of Education that are making it happen these next 2 weeks. It is a lot to shift, to pivot out, but I think they're doing it gracefully, and I really do. I believe they are grateful for the decision. It's the feeling that I get when I talk to them when I've been in and out of the building. So thank you for allowing us to do that. The second grading period, or the end of the first semester, is next Friday, January 14th. And this is a reminder that students do not have school on Monday, January 17th, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And that week thereafter, the week following from January 18th to the 21st, is our midwinter break for our students, while our staff members will be engaged in high-quality professional development. We were able to see, we had a sneak peek today, thanks to the directors, of what our staff will be engaged in during that week. I said to Mrs. Farbing, it is almost as if the directors here have planned a week of a college syllabus. The activities that our staff will be engaged in are powerful and they're going to make differences for kids. And I'm just really excited about them having a chance to focus on great professional development in that week of Martin Luther King Day. So thank you to the directors once again for all the hours they've put into planning an excellent week for our staff. Our students return to the district on Monday, January 24th, which is also the date of the start of our second semester. And during the discussion portion of our meeting this evening, Board of Education, I'll be providing information about the new quarantine and isolation guidance that was recently released by the Centers for Disease Control, Protection, and Prevention, and then endorsed by the Ohio Department of Health and the Summit County Public Health Department. It's very complicated, it's complex, and I appreciate the opportunity in a few minutes here to discuss this new guidance with you. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mrs. Powers. Next is committee reports. I don't believe that we have any. Okay. So then I'll move on, which kind of transition right into the discussion that Mrs. Powers just alluded to for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Ohio Department of Health updated quarantine isolation guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Hurtis. So, Board of Education, in your packet this evening, you have a couple of documents that I'm going to refer to. A couple of them are this golden blue, and at the top it says mask to stay, test to play option. And the second set is the flow chart that is entitled at the top of the first sheet, What to Do If You Have COVID-19. These two documents have had a lot of conversation across the state since the CDC released their guidance last week. And I think the important thing to note is when the CDC released the guidance about the revisions to the quarantine and isolation periods, they had not yet, and they still have not, released the technical guidance to the Ohio Department of Health or the Departments of Health in all 50 states, which meant the local departments of health didn't have and don't have the technical guidance to really understand all of the implications and processes and procedures that they normally have when there's an order from the CDC or a guidance document from the CDC. And so you saw there was a bit of confusion in even my correspondence to our families last week when we were initially told, okay, the CDC has released this document, but we're not going to get anything from the ODH for several weeks. And then within, I tell you, 15 minutes, the ODH released some information, which then caused me to scramble and provide guidance to the family. So that seems to be, unfortunately, how we're managing some of this at this point in time. Sometimes cart before the horse. And when that thing happened with how I released information last week, I corresponded immediately with Commissioner Skoda, and I said, what is going on here? Your department said it's going to be a couple weeks before the guidance, and then within 15 minutes the guidance came out. And she had no answer. It was like whiplash, basically. What you think you're going in one direction, and it's shifted quickly under her feet as well. On Wednesdays of every week, Summit County superintendents have a call with Donna Skoda and her staff. And in the call today, they are dealing with 1,500 cases, positive cases of COVID a day. 1,500. And that's just a phenomenal amount. You know, our numbers over the last 3 weeks, at the beginning of this week, we were over 300. And I say 300, knowing full well that over winter break, families weren't reporting because they felt they didn't need to. And staff wasn't reporting because they felt they didn't need to. So when we say 300, we know that number is very depressed when you think about what the reality might be had everybody reported. So the Omicron variant is alive and well. They're saying 95% of the cases in Ohio now are the Omicron variant. And the hospitalizations are at the highest rate ever since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. So this is a huge healthcare concern, and we continue to learn things, we continue to pivot. And I do apologize that sometimes it even looks like I'm shifting within a moment's notice, but sometimes that's the information that I get and how I'm getting it. And I'll tell you, the district was surprised yesterday by an incident, and I'm telling you the story here because it leads into the discussion this evening, and that is, you know, we've been working in the guidance of the health officials, and when we have a student that tests positive, we had a student who tested positive in one of our buildings just this Monday. Student came to school, didn't know she was positive. Mom finds out the result at noon. The child had been here. And the students in this particular classroom work very closely together with lots of instructional assistants. So I had to contact, trace, and report everyone in that classroom, the children and all of the adults. And when I send that information, it goes to the Summit County portal. What will happen is if staff members have been vaccinated, I get a document back from Summit County to say, these individuals do not need to be quarantined, and so they can stay. In this particular case, we knew this staff had been vaccinated, but what we learned on Tuesday when we got the call from the county is that now, unless you have been boosted, and if it's beyond the 5-month period, you are now not considered to be vaccinated. And so a member of our staff who fully thought she was vaccinated because she had received her dual vaccinations of Pfizer, actually back when we had the clinics here last year, because she had not received her booster within the 5 months of her second vaccination, she's no longer considered to be a vaccinated individual. So this is very troubling because on various levels. First, we have staff members who received the first 2 shots of Pfizer when we had the clinics, But there was some thinking from lots of different places that you didn't need a booster. The booster was nice, it's a good thing to do, but maybe you didn't need it. So we have staff members who determined that they don't need a booster, and that was a decision we made. We also have 17 and 18-year-old students who were vaccinated, first 2 vaccines, back in the spring when we had the clinic, but who have not been boosted either. And so now they're not vaccinated. And I know we're expecting the call soon, if it's already happened, I missed it today, for 12 to 15-year-olds to be authorized for the booster. But as I'm thinking and putting together this conversation, they still hadn't been authorized for the booster. So we may have 12 to 15-year-olds who are now outside of that 5-month period of time since their last dual shot, who are also not vaccinated. So this is a huge part of this conversation, and one that sort of caught all of us, superintendent, sort of as a surprise this week, when we're thinking, how do you move forward with the new guidance? So yesterday, I had an opportunity to sit down on a phone call with Summit County health officials and with Jennifer Pinckney, our nurse. And I have to say again, Ms. Pinckney is working so diligently, and she is such a true partner with us in anything to do with health of students and staff. And I'm so grateful for her guidance. I'm not a registered nurse, she is, so I lean on her a lot for some of these decisions. So Nurse Pinckney and I had a chance yesterday to have a sort of a private conversation with health officials as we were trying to figure out what do we do now, because I know I have staff that are not boosted. I know I have kids now not boosted. And if you think about it, when we were on winter break, if you're a parent of a high school student, we know we had some issues with some of our athletic teams during winter break with a couple of cases of COVID, and we had to shut some things down over break. So when that happened, once again, I sent the names of all those individuals to the county health department, and they cleared all of the students who had been vaccinated. That was before all the rules changed. So when we thought we knew who the vaccinated athletes were, that has now shifted on us again, and now we really don't know, because we're not sure who has received the booster. So it's very complicated in that sense. So what do you do? Because if we go by the pure sense of the 5-day rule, you'll see implications that it's based on how folks work or walk through the flow chart is dependent on whether or not they're vaccinated, and whether or not they're vaccinated now, the definition is not just 2 shots of Pfizer, it's 2 shots of Pfizer and the booster within 5 months. So it has big implications for the school district if we were just to say this is how we're going to operate under the guise of what the Ohio Department of Health, the CDC, and the Summit County Public Health Department released as an avenue to pursue. So in our conversation with Summit County health officials just yesterday, I said, okay, how do we keep the train on the tracks as a school district? How do we continue to operate knowing this news about the booster is relatively new, not everyone has gotten boosted for lots of different reasons, and kids are coming back to school in 2 weeks, we've got to be able to hit the ground running. So what advice I have been given, and I'd like to present this to you this evening for your consideration, is what I have here on the screen, and you have it also in your packets. It's Mask to Stay, Test to Play. Now, board, back a couple months ago, we talked about Mask to Stay, Test to Play. And part of the Mask to Stay, Test to Play, you can assume on first blush that the students and staff wouldn't come to school with masks on. And we have been very deliberate in understanding that the masks at this point and since the beginning of the year have been the right thing to do, especially now in the middle of this surge. But what the county said to me is, you can implement Masks to Stay, Test to Play and still require the masks being in place. So we can take the language of Masks to Stay, Test to Play, but insert in our continued requirement for the masking. And so I just want to talk through this. These documents are so wordy, and so we took the opportunity to just try to wrap our minds around what this might mean for the school district. So that's what's on the screen, and that's what's in your packet. I'd like to walk you through it. Now, with Masks to Stay, Test to Play, there's a dividing line between where an exposure happens. An exposure happens in school, or does it happen, at home? And I want to say the majority of positive cases, and especially right now because the kids aren't here, are happening because there's something in a home, something in a family gathering, something in a rec game somehow or another, even going to the grocery store anymore. You can catch COVID so easily with this latest variant. So let's first talk about if there's an exposure at school. And so if we're able to trace that we have an exposure at school, a student is a direct contact and becomes COVID positive because of another student who's in direct contact, sort of like what happened this week in that classroom where we had a positive student and then I had to send that group of kids out. If any of those children now test positive here in the next week, I'm going to probably say that happened because of the positive kiddo that was in the classroom. So we will be continuing to be very deliberate about how we're tracing this in the schools. But anyhow, so if the exposure happens in the school, the student and the staff member involved would still continue to come to school and they would remain masked unless they have symptoms. And this would happen regardless of the vaccination status. And this is the most critical important part of this. So whether you're boosted or not boosted, if the board adopts the mask to stay, test to play, folks would come to school even if they're in exposed positions as long as they're not symptomatic. And if you even have just one symptom, it changes for you. But everyone else would be able to come to school, continue coming, learning on campus. The only caveat that is going to be a bit difficult is if a student is unable to mask for whatever reason, then they would need to remain at home and follow the Odh Flow Chart, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The importance here to mask stay is there's such value to wearing the masks. Now the board's current and hopeful future continuance of the masks, at least in the short term, doesn't make this any different for our school district than what we've already been doing since the beginning of the year and last school year too. But for some districts who have the masks optional, that part plays largely. It doesn't play largely for us because we're already there. If there's exposure at school and there happens to be symptoms, then the individual would need to isolate when they're at home and get tested and of course then stay home. The problem is it's so difficult to get testing right now, and so I think in this thinking that the exposure is at school and we're having kids come back to school without the symptom, there's no need for the parent to try to get the child tested unless they're extremely curious about that. So it's not a requirement for the testing to occur, even if you're in a classroom where you think you have been exposed, unless of course you have a symptom develop. We will be looking at bus exposures the same as we would a classroom exposure or a soccer team exposure or a swim team exposure. Any activity that is related to how we operate as a school district would be using the same procedures as a classroom exposure. And I'll tell you, board, when I was reporting direct contacts, even last year, the majority of the direct contacts I have been reporting happened to be on our school buses because the children sit so close together. They were far greater than even 3 feet. But with this, we're not going to be requiring students to have to stay home if we follow the mask to stay process here. They continue to come to school unless, of course, they become symptomatic, and then it shifts for them and their families. The other important thing here is the notification piece. We are still required to report positive cases to the Summit County Public Health Department, to the portal that we use. That doesn't change. The only time that would change is if the departments of health were to determine that the coronavirus is now called a Class B virus, but it's still classified as a Class A virus, and so we have all the more stringent reporting requirements. The thing here, though, is if the board was to shift to masks to stay, we would no longer be sending home the individual classroom notifications. And the reason for that is, there is no way possible we would be able to keep up with that. We would shift our COVID-19 dashboard, and instead of it being, for the week of like it currently is, we would do it by grade level, so a parent would know if their grade level child has a situation. But we would no longer be able to keep up with the pace of the individual letters that we have been sending home since the beginning of the pandemic. So that would be that's a pretty significant shift. What I told the principals earlier today is that what I would say to parents who just need to know this in my child's classroom and call the building principal. They will know which classroom it's in, but it's not going to be pushing those letters out every day as we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. And the reason for that lesser restriction than the reporting is what they have found now is that all this reporting and tracing that mostly Ms. Pinky and I have been doing has no disease control difference. So all of this, I think it helps quell fears mostly. I think it was good for our parents because they knew, but in the world of science, there's no relevance to doing all those steps. And so that was no longer a requirement as long as the masks are in place in our schools. Of course, if the district were to move away from the mask requirement, then in order for students to stay in school under school exposure, they would have to wear the masks in school for 10 days. And in speaking with the principals earlier today, that would be very difficult to know that student needs to have a mask on for 10 days, but that student doesn't, and then this student's start of his 10-day period is here, but that one starts here. And so the management piece of that would be very unwieldy for building level folks. So staying the course with the masks really does help here to continue with this good work without adding another layer of strain on employees who are already trying to manage this COVID environment. So I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions about exposure in school? Because we're going to shift gears here to exposure out of school in a second. Okay. All right, so when we talk about exposure away from school, and honestly that's the majority of what we're seeing last week, the week before this week, because of family situations and things happening in the community. Exposure that is not in school, we shift to the 5-day rule here. So, Mrs. Farthing, if you can go farther down, and we'll come back up on that other part in a minute. So we're going to take a look at the Cdc Odh Flow Charts because this is what would kick in then if a person is exposed outside of any school activity. These are relatively easy to follow, but what I would like to talk through, not so much about if you have COVID, because I think, relatively speaking, it's easy to understand that when you have symptoms of COVID, instead of being out for until the 8th day, you would be able to come back to school on day 6. So you have to stay out for 5, and then you can come back on day 6. It used to be a requirement that you had to test to come out of isolation or quarantine. It is no longer a requirement. However, what we hear today is that no longer a requirement, nor do you have to be 100% symptom-free. You just have to be getting better. So who decides who is getting better? And that's where we need to really ask our families to help us, our parents. So if your child is getting better, maybe their sniffle isn't as bad or their cough isn't as bad, they might still have a cough, but it's not as bad. On day 6, they can come back to school, but they, of course, will have their masks on. And they also have to be fever-free for at least 24 hours without medication. So important things to remember. The other thing, board, that I will need to push out is the latest guidance is suggesting that the cloth masks that so many of us enjoy to wear are now being deemed not necessarily as protective as the surgical masks are, and what they're suggesting is the 3-ply surgical mask or a surgical mask underneath a cloth mask because the Omicron variant seems to be able to penetrate the cloth masks that are usually just 2-ply. So I'll be suggesting, once we get back underway, that our students consider wearing the surgical masks that are 3-ply, or putting one of these underneath a mask, or doubling up on a cloth mask, so that there's a better resistance to this particular variant. With regard to this chart again, if we're talking about exposure outside of school, the vaccine plays large in what happens to you, because there is a chart for if you are vaccinated, and there's a chart for if you're not vaccinated. And again, vaccinated people now are considered those who have been duly vaccinated, plus the booster after 5 months, not 6 months. It used to be thought 6 months, but now they've lessened it by 1 month. So it's 5 months after your second Pfizer shot, you would need to be boosted. Then you're considered to be a fully vaccinated individual. So one of these flow charts discusses the steps for vaccinated individuals, and the other one discusses the steps for the unvaccinated individual. And so it'll be really important for us to get a better handle on whether or not the school district can request vaccination status of staff and students. The reason I say we need to get a better handle on it, there seems to be a legal discourse going on in the state as to whether or not school districts have the ability and right to ask for COVID-19 vaccination status. According to the board's legal counsel, who I spoke with repeatedly today, the answer is we have the ability to request that information. But according to what I heard today out in Summit County, there's a question as to whether or not that's true. So we need to get the right answer before we proceed, so as to not get into the middle of a conflict there. But it's going to be important to understand whether or not the board has the right to request that information, because it'll help with trying to manage all of this for folks who have exposure outside of school. So the most important part of these documents, I would say, is in the black oval about what happens when all of these criteria are met. For example, on this particular one, if your vaccines are up to date, and that includes your booster, what you do is you would wear a mask around others for 10 days after your last exposure. You would test on day 5, that's recommended, it's not required. And if you develop symptoms, you would stay home and follow the procedures from the first page of this flow chart about having COVID-19. So there's just a lot to manage with regard to the understanding of vaccinated versus not vaccinated, and I hope to get a definitive answer here in the next few days so that we can push out the right information to our families and staff before we are back full throttle with everybody back on campus. So again, these charts would only apply, the flow charts from ODH would only apply when we have a positive case and that exposure happens outside school. Any questions about that?
I have a question. When it says test on day 5,
Mm-hmm.
are we going to require them to do that? Or are we just gonna, if they don't have any symptoms, they're just, okay?
So are we talking about,
The one where it says they're vaccinated, for 10 days they can wear the mask, and then it says they test on day 5.
right, so all of that right now is recommended, not required. Health officials have stepped aside from the requirement as long as that day 1 to 5 has passed, so you can come back on day 6. There's no longer the requirement to have to test to come out of isolation. And the thinking behind that is twofold. There are some thought is the limited number of tests available, but more than that, the science will tell you that a person is the most contagious 24 hours before symptoms start. So it's really on the front end of you identifying as a COVID positive person where you could have potentially exposed somebody, not so much at the back end. So the decision now has been made that the tests are not required to come back to campus, which is a good move, I think.
And that's why they have it where if their symptoms are going down after the 5th day, they're fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you don't have to be 100% without a cough, it just has to be better than it was. But the fever still has to be not with you for 24 hours without medication. That's a, and that's a practice we've had without COVID. It's been a practice here for allowing kids and staff to come back, this being fever-free for a 24-hour period.
And then I have a question, I don't know if it's for here or a little bit later. I know the tests have been really, really hard to come by, but we're going to be getting a limited number. You may have told us this before, but are we distributing, if a parent wants their child tested, would it be if they're only exhibiting symptoms? Is there a set
Criteria?
yes?
For the test kits that we currently have?
Yes.
So, Nurse Pinckney is really working hard at this.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's an overwhelming task. I asked our parents please to have some grace and patience with her, because you can only get to as many emails as you can get to when you're also dealing with COVID positive situations and other things that happen, other health things that happen in the district in a day. So what I asked her to do is in the emails from our parents, the parents have identified that they have a symptom case in their home. Those are the families that are getting serviced first.
Because I think that's where you put it in the email that the families received.
Right. We only had, when we got the shipment, 754 kids. So we understand they're going to go pretty quickly, and we're trying to service the families with the greatest need based on what parents are telling us in the emails. So those families would be serviced first, and then, kids thereafter to those based on how things come in her email. So she's trying as much as she can to keep up with it, and her in partnership with Kelly Delphin at the board office, they have a nice system underway. Parents can pick up their kids from the board office, and it's been working. It's just, it takes time, and I know our families are anxious about testing their children and sometimes themselves, and we're working as quickly as we can to get that information and those kids out to them.
Ask a question. So this is in response to the most recent guidance that came out from the CDC, correct?
Yes.
Because I know that early on there was some confusion amongst county agencies as to whether or not this is something that was applicable to the general public, or, so now everyone's pretty much aligned with the most recent CDC guidance, which is what this is.
Right. So when the Ohio Department of Health authorized this and came out with this guidance for schools, that was our understanding that now it applies to us. So we had to wait for all of these systems to work, and then it was given to us, and now we understand what our marching orders are based on this now. But all school districts are trying to make it work for their particular situations, and everybody's a little different, which is it's been very confusing.
Yeah, and my other question, just so that I'm clear with respect to who the people who are considered that with their vaccinations are not up to date, does that include, so if you got a booster, are you considered not up to date if it's within these same time frames, like the within the last 6 months?
So our boosters, for example, we had the booster clinic here
Right.
October 22nd when our staff received the booster if they wanted it. So 6 months from now, I think it's April 22nd, I would imagine, haven't heard it,
Mm-hmm.
but I would imagine based on what's going on here, there may be the need for another booster.
But if they got a booster at that time, they are considered vaccinated.
Fully vaccinated,
Okay,
right?
okay. All right, I just wanted to, for my own clarification and also for the public, because that's a clear differentiation, is if you got a booster when it was made available, you're within that window.
Right.
Okay.
So if someone was to get a booster after, so if someone got a booster this week, and would they be considered still vaccinated? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But with the booster though, doesn't it still take 2 weeks to go fully tested?
Right. Right. But they would be considered
after that time period has passed. So it gives your body opportunities to build the antigens.
Okay, so Mrs. Powers, we're having this discussion. You're not asking for any recommendations right now. This is just for information based on the latest information that we have available with respect to quarantining, right?
Well, at the end of this, I am going to ask, and I sent you a draft resolution to
Okay.
support this, but let's get through all of this.
Yep.
There's a lot to think about.
Okay.
Any questions about how we would operate if an exposure happens off campus? It's going to be following the flow charts from the Department of Health.
But I will just make a comment saying that I would recommend calling the doctor as well, just because I was able to I did do the rapid test and they were negative with my kids, and then the next day I took them to the doctor and they tested positive. So my kids' doctor, they have been able to get them in any time, same day that I call. I don't know about everyone's doctor, but I will also just recommend that.
The doctors are doing the PCR tests, which are much more specific. The kids are antigen tests. And one more word about the kids. You'll find here in the next part that we talk about. Families are picking up the Binax Now kits, and some families are not doing the proctored part of it. You're going to hear here in a minute that having the proctored part, especially for our athletes, is going to go, they're going to do the ticket to pass go. You can't just buy an over-the-counter, unproctored test, CVS or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be the standard that will be high enough to allow, let's talk about the athletes to come back into play. And it's a higher standard. It is, we had a situation in my own home, so we had to get a test kit and we did the whole thing. It's a little tricky, especially if you're not technologically astute. My husband and I were kidding about this, have to download an app, and then you have to do the swab thing, and you have to put it in the little thing, and put the drops in and all that. Takes some time, but then when it was all said and done, Paul got a report that said you're negative, and that's what he presented to his employer. So those things are really important. So if I know it's one more thing, and parents have a lot going on, but if you're going to pick up a Binax Now kit, I just encourage you to do the proctored test procedure, and then you have this hard copy that says you're either positive or negative. When I was doing the contact tracing over winter break, a lot of times the parents would just send me a screenshot of the little thing, the 2 pink bars, okay? But that doesn't, that's not the official. So you really want that official document, and you get it through that proctor test. It does take a little bit of time to figure it out, though. I can, my husband can help you now.
That's good information.
Okay, so we have what we're going to do with exposure at school, what we're going to do with exposure at home. The other part to the mask to stay is the test to play. And this has to do with all of our athletic programs, with our show choir. We're talking about kids that are doing things outside of the day. How do we keep that on the tracks for them? And so this probably, if you go to the test to play section of that document. Again, board, it's all in this document. It's pretty wordy though. On the last page is the test to play section of this. So, and this is, talked to Mr. Fantone this afternoon, because this is going to be a shift in his operation. If the board decides to do this, but I don't actually know how to make it work otherwise. So if you have student athletes, let's just use basketball for example, and there's been an exposure, and we have some concern on a team, the asymptomatic kids can continue to participate, but there needs to be some things that have to happen before they get the ticket to pass go. So first of all, asymptomatic, remember, any symptoms at all, you're back to doing this, and you're not participating in basketball or any other activity until you clear day 6, you're back on day 6. But for the student athlete who follows what these new sets of rules are, they can continue to play if they do the following: Of course, they're wearing a mask. They're not wearing a mask when they're in the midst of competition. So let's talk about our boys' undefeated basketball team right now. Doing an awesome job. When the boys are on the court, running back and forth, they don't have a mask on. The minute they're on the bench, the masks are back on. They're in the locker room, the masks are on. They're in the hallway, they're on the buses, masks have got to be 100% of the time. If there's a concern about a direct contact, this is where it's going to get a little different, and this is going to be hard for our families to go along with what it's going to be required. There has to be a proctored test on day one of notification. If there's not a proctored test on day one, the student athlete is not allowed to participate until day 6. So, and we went over this repeatedly today with Commissioner Skoda. This is not negotiable. So we have a situation on a team, there's an exposure. Day 1, there has got to be a proctored test that tests negative for that athlete or student who's has an activity to come back to whatever that activity is. Of course, if they test negative, life goes on, they have their mask on except when they're in the middle of play, and they continue to participate. They test positive, then we shift to this, and they're home. They'd be home from school too, of course. The departments of health will not accept unproctored tests for students to participate for test play. It has to be a proctored test. Now, the concern here is the difficulty of getting a proctored test. And a PCR test is even harder. So we're talking about the antigen Binax now kits for the most part. The Board of Health has told school districts, you are not responsible for having a stockpile of Binax now for your athletes. Because we just can't. There just isn't enough to go around. So parents are going to have to help us with this situation, and hopefully they'll be able to obtain a Binax now kit either by calling the county and driving down to the county office and getting a test. And you can do that, of course, by going online and when they have those available to get a test there. Or if everything lines up, getting a test kit out of the board office or from somebody else's employer or whatever. But it has to be a proctor test. And unfortunately, Nurse Pinckney is not authorized to be the proctor. We asked that question too. Can the district nurse be the one to proctor the test? Her license does not provide that, so we cannot allow that here. And so that won't be the case. So this is going to be a little touch and go for our students. And it doesn't matter the vaccination status of the athlete. The athletes have to do this if they're a close contact. So I'm a little concerned about the availability of test kits. One of the things that we can do is in the next shipment is to set aside kits for our students so that if we have a situation on one of our teams, we have kits here. So we can do that as a stopgap. That's what I would suggest that we would do. We would take the portion away from families, but it would also allow the teams to continue to participate if there's an exposure case.
I would agree.
And then the question about opposing teams, regardless of what they do with their schools, we can require them to wear masks on the benches, right? If they're in our state, playing in our field house.
Right. So the board has currently the mask mandate, so they should already be doing that when they're here. And the board also has the compliance officers that are busy at our events. So honestly, in talking with the health officials yesterday and again today, I really feel, board, that this allows us to reopen, allows us to keep the kids in school, keep the staff here, which is really important too, but still has layers of protection to hopefully mitigate the spread of the virus. Eventually we have to figure out a way to keep moving on, and I think this is the first step. If we so desire to do this, the next part of this would be the messaging to the staff, and then the messaging to the families. I say the messaging to the staff would need to be probably starting tomorrow because the staff is here.
a lot. I appreciate your attention to this. It's a lot of ifs, thens, and how about this kind of thing.
So if we didn't do the test to play, what would be the alternative for the athletes?
So if the board does not adopt this, the only option you have is this. And the problem with just this is the vaccination status of staff and students. And eventually we may be able to get to just doing this, but I don't think we're there now. And the situation that happened with just one classroom this week troubled me deeply because we ended up having to send a staff member home who we thought was clear to be here, and she clearly wasn't now with the new guidance.
And as you're saying, what I'm hearing too, the benefits of the test to play, we're not, as of now, we're not requiring people to disclose whether they've had their vaccinations or not, the status. And as you said, there's confusion as to whether they're up to date with their booster or not, and if they aren't, there's kind of the scramble to try to get that booster. So this just seems to offer another layer of protection because we, as of now, we can't know everybody's status.
Right. Scott Peters and I talked twice today about this, and his opinion is the board has the right to ask for it. But on the call to the county today, that's being questioned. So I just want to make sure that we're right before we ask for it, and then we're not supposed to ask for it. And as soon as that is defined, I will of course keep you posted and the families posted. But it would be very helpful if we knew that. Even over winter break when we had the exposure with the athletic teams, we had to wait for the county to tell us which of the students were vaccinated and come back to play committee out. And they're very busy with the surge, so it took one team, it took probably 7 days before I had the answer. And it's often contingent upon the positive student's parent being able to report a test result and not just thinking that a photo of a little test kit is complete. And that's what happened with one of our teams, is the parent didn't have a proctor test. So they had to have another conversation with the county so the county would consider that test a positive. So extra steps have to be put into play. That's why if we're picking up the Binax Snap kids, if you have a suspicion of a positive, I respectfully request that you do the steps with the proctor because it just takes all the question marks out of the middle of it. And you know for sure whether or not your child is, confirmed positive that way too.
And I will say with the proctor, without the proctor, I mean, it is easy to not do the test correctly because once you put in the drops, you have to, twist it like 3 times. And if you, after you close it, if you're like, oh, I only did that once, that test is invalid, really.
Right.
So the proctor is there to make sure you're doing it and they're watching it exactly as you need to make sure that that's a valid result.
Right.
Yeah.
So moving to this, if we move to the Master State Test to Play, we are requiring masks in general, but this would allow a more feasible option to keep the kids in school.
Correct. Particularly the kids that have been identified as having to stay home because of the contact on the buses. The majority of the students that had to stay home have occurred because of the fact that they're sitting right next to each other. And you didn't have the physical distance requirement met, so those were an automatic, you had to stay home from school. And those were tough for parents because, they're doing what they need to do. The students have their masks on. They're just on the bus, and it was just because they were so close together. And we actually have sent a lot of kids home under quarantine because of the bus. This will take that out of the mix and allow kids to be here as long as they continue to wear their masks.
No, I do appreciate that there's less ambiguity here. I can remember early on, we were in the midst of this about a year ago, and people, were, looking at us saying that we're, just kind of making things up, understanding that things are changing a lot. But we go with the best guidance that we have, and I think that the more specificity that we're getting from our from our professionals takes that out of play, and we have something that we can stand on, that is very specific with respect to timelines, with respect to circumstances, whether you're in district, whether you're out of district. I think checking all those boxes with respect to the different scenarios, I think provides much more clarity to people that may be in those circumstances, so that, and the onus isn't necessarily on us to make a determination. We're following the guidance that we've been given.
And just, again, Mrs. Travis reminded me, in the draft resolution that you will see forward, the one sentence you might want to add, so the resolution is worded, result of the Twinsburg Board of Education authorizing the adjustment to the district's reopening plan to include the mask, state test, play guidance, as well as the Ohio Department of Health's isolation quarantine flow chart is presented in the discussion portion of the agenda. I would also just add to this resolution, for the foreseeable future, the mask mandate continues to be in play. And then just one other thing before we conclude with that is, currently the preschool students are highly recommended to wear masks. I've heard from our preschool staff and administration at Wilcox asking for consideration now for the masks to be required for preschoolers unless there is a medical reason why the student cannot. It could be in their IEP, since we have a number of students with disabilities in our preschool. Didn't know what you thought about that. That would have to be an adjustment to policy, and so I would have to bring that forth the next board meeting. So that wouldn't be something we could do this evening, because that's actually written in policy. But I didn't know what your feeling is with regard to preschool. So I was wondering what your opinions happen to be.
I have my son's in preschool at Wilcox, and as a 4-year-old, he wears the mask better than my other kids. He doesn't complain, and I would say since he's been 3 or 2, he's been very diligent and has never complained about it, and he likes it. So like, he goes to school and I have had no issues with it, so I'm fine with it. But I don't know, every kid is different, so.
I think at that age, if they're able to do it, it's just a benefit to do it for them right now, if we're doing it with everybody else. But I do agree, if there's a reason why a little child cannot handle that, then we get that taken care of.
Right, and I agree with that as well. I mean, there will be situations where it's going to be, they may not be able to, but I can tell you that in the building I work in, at the clinic, the patients that are 2 and over, they do require it, and even the youngest are doing really well with it. I mean, I won't say every single kid and every single little toddler, but they're kind of, at this point, getting used to it. That's what they know. It's sad, but it is what they know, and but they do even a better job than some of the adults I've seen coming into the building.
In my visit to the preschool this week, 100% of the children had masks on and they were wearing them right. So they've gotten used to wearing them. Okay. It was earlier in the day when I was there, so that was just a good day. But so with your approval, we'll make an adjustment on the policy, which I'll bring forth the next meeting, and then I'll let the staff know that's coming. It's just not here quite yet.
But I do think there should be exceptions for those kids who might have those situations where they can't. They just, for some like reason, it doesn't work.
Thank you.
Chief, I copied the resolution.
Oh, right here.
No, right here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, sorry.
Nope.
You want us to add with the mask mandate to
got it.
remain?
Yes.
No. I wasn't even looking at that. Okay.
She wants us to add with the mask mandate to remain.
Yep. What was the change?
And in the wording, you're recommending for the resolution?
So the resolution would go into a portion of the agenda period until further board action, the current mask mandate continues, something like that.
Okay. Okay, that was a lot. But I do appreciate the presentation, Superintendent Powers, as well as thoughtful discussion for my colleagues. We'll move on to remonstrance. I do not believe we have any blue cards. Pretty sure of that?
No cards.
Okay, so then we'll move on to item H, which is the treasurer's report. Without objection from my colleagues, I will read H1 through 6 together. H1, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the following meeting minutes. Regular meeting of the board of the December 8th, 2021, and special meeting of the December 16th, 2021, as sent to the board under separate cover. 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the following financial reports: bank reconciliation, general fund, financial summary report, and financial report by fund for the month of November 2021, as sent to the board under separate cover. 3, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the check register for the month of November 2021. The total, including payroll and debt, is $7,661,539.73. 4, that the Twinsburg Board of Education, Summit County, Ohio, reviews and approve the tax budget for the Twinsburg City School District for the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2021. 5, that the Twinsburg Board of Education, Summit County, Ohio, in order to provide for the prompt and efficient execution of financial affairs for Twinsburg City School District, authorizes the treasurer to perform a transfer sufficient to cover the amount of food service and grant funds, ORC 3315.20, and that the unencumbered balance in the school district's general fund is greater than the aggregate required amount. Transfer is necessary to cover the negative balance resulting from the COVID pandemic and reduced revenues. Transfer $171,000 and $471 from the general fund into the food service fund. And 6, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the purchase of an insurance policy covering employee faithful performance of duty, dishonesty in lieu of, and or in addition to a surety bond for the treasurer as passed by the 133rd General Assembly in December 2020, amending the Ohio Revised Code section 3.061. Do I have a motion to approve H1 through 6?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Crawford. Discussion. Mr. Aho, can you provide just a little clarification or explanation for items 5 and 6?
Sure. Well, of course, just to touch on item 4. Item 4 is what we do typically for the tax budget. We do that every year. That's part of what we're required to do with Summit County. So there's that there's a piece there. The transfer is to cover the deficit in food service. Last year, typically food service brings in about $1 million. Last year it was, their revenues were down, so they wound up at the end of the year with a deficit balance. Mr. Bendis thought they were going to get some more dollars from the federal government, so he didn't do the transfer at the end of the year because we weren't sure what that balance was. But it's carried forward, and this is what it is. It's $171,000 that he was short in revenues. His expenses didn't really, change a whole lot, but his revenues, just because, when he has the kids in the building, he does a la carte, which he is favorable to his bottom line. Just serving the typical meal, he's just happy to cover his costs. And unfortunately, that didn't happen last year.
I would presume that that's COVID related.
Yeah, it's all because of having to, not having kids in the buildings. We can't buy the extra, drink or whatever, extra entrees and all that. And then the last one is, over time, officials of school districts have had to have surety bonds. One time, like business manager, superintendent, myself, all had to have surety bonds, and over time, that's gone away. The treasurer's the last one where they're saying, you know, it makes sense just to put everybody under the big liability insurance of the district. And actually, it protects the district more than having a surety bond. A surety bond is set for like a specific dollar value. And typically, you know, it's not a huge amount of money. The liability that the district carries is substantially more than what a surety bond covers. So then it just covers, you know, all the district officials that are, you know, potentially involved with the finances under this liability insurance, which is better protection really for the district.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions from my board colleagues or the superintendent? Okay, hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mrs. Travis?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. On to item I, action items. Without objection from my colleagues, I will read them together. I-1, resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the certificated licensed personnel and/or contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background check. Items 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the classified personnel and/or contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background checks. And 3, that the Twinsburg Board of Education accepts the supplemental contract recommendations detailed in the attached exhibit as per the dates, terms, and as per the dates, the terms, and other applicable conditions specified pending satisfactory ORC background check. Do I have a motion for items I-1 through 3?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Travis. Any discussion?
Mr. Curtis, just for the sake of transparency, the board added a couple of things at the beginning of this meeting, and the public doesn't have that information. So what was added for H1 under certificated contracts, the recommendation is to employ Kelly Gaydash as a long-term substitute teacher for a Bridge to Success program at Samuel Bissell Elementary School. This is under the umbrella of the MOU with the Twinsburg Education Association. So this is a position just for this year, and the position is meant to help fill the academic gaps of students that have been caused by the pandemic. So we are excited to recommend Mrs. Gaydash to you. She's a parent of students in the district. You may know her. She on the side, she's a side business. She does those leather earrings. Yes. So we're excited to welcome her to the staff upon your approval this evening. And then the extracurricular activities, the two contracts there are both related to the show choir. The first is for Shane Coe, who would be, is recommended here as the choreographer for the show choir. And then Lucas Walter, who happens to be one of our music teachers at Bissell. He is interested in becoming the assistant high school show choir director under the umbrella with Mr. Peter Hampton as our director. So those are the two that we're adding to the agenda this evening. Thank you for allowing that.
No, thank you for that. I meant to mention that as I finished up there, so I appreciate the catch. Any other comments? Okay, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Travis?
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes, and that item passes 4-0. We'll move on to item J, action items and new business. Without objection from my colleagues, I will read J1 through 8 together. J1, resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves Brian Lynn as a credentialed evaluator for the purpose of the Ohio Principal Evaluation System, and Belinda McKinney as a credentialed evaluator for the purpose of the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. 2, that the Twinsburg Board of Education, in accordance with Board Policy 9211, acknowledge the Twinsburg Band Boosters as a district support organization. And 3, resolve that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the first reading of revised Board of Education policies, and they are listed within 4, resolved that the Board of Education approves the following proposed hourly wages for classified substitute employees effective January 1, 2022, and they're also listed. 5, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves compensation, to the following Garfield Heights police officers scheduled to provide security for home hockey games held at the Garfield Heights Ice Arena during the 2021-2022 school year at a rate of $25 an hour with a 4-hour minimum per game. Mike Lang, Kevin Price, and Jen Shipta. 6, that the Board of Education approves the Memorandum of Understanding with the Twinsburg Education Association regarding individual instruction with students during contact time as stated in Article 7C3 of the negotiated agreement as sent to the board under separate cover. 7, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the Ohio School Boards Association Legal Assistance Fund consultant service contract for the calendar year 2022 at a cost of $250 as sent to the board under separate cover. And 8, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the Twinsburg High School senior Rachel Camp to exercise Board of Education Policy 5111, optional tuition-free education, and remain at Twinsburg High School student through the end of the 2021-2022 school year. Do I have a motion for items J 1 through 8? So moved by Mrs. Crawford. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Travis. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mrs. Travis?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. We'll move on to J9 through J9 and 10. J9, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the inter-district service agreement with the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio, 6392 Oak Tree Boulevard, Independence, Ohio 44131, for the 2021-2022 school year for the following positions: gifted consultant, network manager, tech support specialist, tech resource assistant, security liaison, special education consultant, temporary psychologist, per the terms detailed in the agreement as sent to the board under separate cover. This is a general fund expenditure. And 10, that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the agreement with the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio for the 2021-2022 school year to provide up to 21 additional hours of audiology services at $107.95 per hour, 60 additional hours of hearing impaired services at $103.25 per hour, and 23 additional hours of orientation and mobility services at $75 an hour, and 11 hours of rehabilitation specialist services at $51.91 per hour. This will be a general fund expense as sent to the board under separate cover. Initial hours approved were in August 4th of 2021. Do I have a motion for J, 9, and 10?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Davis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Crawford. Any comments or discussion?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on that. To be transparent, I do work for the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio, and although I have no connection to any of the departments mentioned here, nor do I gain any financial benefit from these moves here, I want to avoid any appearance of impropriety, and I will abstain from the vote on this particular piece.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Travis. Any other comments? Okay, Mr. Aho, hearing none, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mrs. Travis?
Abstain.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. And that item passes 3 with 1 abstention. Moving on to items J11 through 14. 11, Resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the purchase of 3 Blue Bird Vision 72-passenger BBC V 3301 stock Unit 921 buses at a total cost of $264,552 pursuant to the terms and conditions set forth in the proposal sent to the board under separate cover. The buses will be purchased through the Fall 2021 Ohio Schools Council bid from Cardinal Bus Sales and Service Incorporated, 6280 Harding Highway, Street, Route 309, Lima, Ohio, 45801. This is a permanent improvement expenditure. 12, that the Board of Education approves an agreement with Garland DBS Incorporated, 3800 East 91st Street, Cleveland, Ohio, 44105, for the summer 2022 Twinsburg School District roof replacement repair project at R.B. Chamberlain Middle School through the U.S. Communities Purchasing Consortium, per the terms and conditions set forth in the agreement, and at a cost not to exceed $110,675, as sent to the board on a separate cover. This is a permanent improvement expenditure. And resolved that the 13, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education approves the First Amendment to the 6-year sponsorship agreement of March 15th, 2017 with the American Bottling Company, 5301 Legacy Drive, Plano, Texas, 75024, pursuant to the terms and conditions set forth in the agreement as set to the board under separate cover. This amendment addresses the district's limited beverage purchases for the 2021 school year related to COVID. And what has been added, action item, new business, J14, resolved that the Twinsburg Board of Education authorizes the adjustment to the district's reopening plan to include the mask stay, test to play guidance, as well as the Ohio Department of Health's isolation quarantine flow chart as presented in the discussion portion of the agenda. In addition, that the board will continue to mandate, to continue the current mask mandate that is currently in place. Do I have a motion to approve items J 11 through 14?
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. Travis. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Davis. Any discussion? I would just like to comment, and I always do this, the bus purchase piece is something that we've participated in as long as I've been a board member. And it's provided us an opportunity to purchase buses at a reduced expenditure, and the timing of this allows us to take advantage of the savings and also get our buses prepared when they're necessary to stay in the regular rotation, making sure that our buses are as new as possible and is in the best position, in the best condition, but also leveraging the best price point, working through the Ohio Schools Council. We've done a lot of business with them. They're very reputable, and you know, I think Mr. Welker has done an awesome job negotiating, making sure that the district is, you know, getting the most bang for their buck in that regard. And also the same deal for the roof replacement. We work in a lot of consortiums for purposes of leveraging lower prices and getting higher quality services and goods that are very cost beneficial for the district. Any other comments, questions?
Mr. Curtis, if I could just mention too, you know, the work Chad has already done with regard to the summer projects. He will tell you, Chad, feel free to come up and talk about this. If we're not out of the chute early, the likelihood of us being able to get the product here and be ready to roll the first day of summer vacation is at risk. And so by him being very aware of the market and of lining us up, and this is all based on roof studies and things that have already happened, but he's working forward in time, and I just want to applaud him publicly for having that wherewithal, because if we wait another month or two to get this authorized, we're not going to get the roofs fixed this
Thanks. Yeah, so we're just trying to get ahead of time to pre-order the roofing supplies. Our goal is to have everything done before Twins Day for RB Chamberlain because it's right there. So this will give us the best chance of having that occur. So thank you, but Superintendent Power said it very well.
And Chad, can you just clear up what the resolution is with regard to our partners at American Bottling Company? This is our scoreboard multimedia project. One of our partners, Dr. Pepper Snapple.
Yeah, so the American Bottling Company really is the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, or they're actually owned by Keurig, which is the coffee company. So very similar to Mr. Aho's comments about the food service fund, our beverage purchases in the 2021 school year, and actually going in a little earlier when COVID first occurred, were significantly reduced. So the American Bottling Company approached us as a good partner and just talked to us about, we didn't get the beverage sales that we were looking for. However, we don't want to reduce the payment to the schools. So in return, what they did was they just asked to extend the contract for a year. They also wanted some protection to make sure that if reduced sales happened again, that they'd be protected. On the flip side, we didn't want the contract to go. We know people in certain contracts that they're still going on after 10, 15 years. So we added a cap, so the most it can extend is 2 years. And in addition, we get most of the money, I think it's about 80% of the funds right away upon the execution. So it's fairly favorable to the district considering that our beverage sales were dramatically reduced in the 2021 school year.
I appreciate that explanation because it's something that we want to make sure that we maintain good partners. They've been very good with us since the inception of the scoreboard project and initiative, and the fact that everybody's being impacted financially with COVID, and so the extent to which they were able to sit down with us and work out a viable solution that that there's no significant hardship on either side, but allows them to kind of recoup some of the losses that they incurred during that time, I think is beneficial for the district.
And we should note that the agreement includes $10,000 a year for the first 5 years, plus $5,000 for the 6th year, and then $750 a year to the Twinsburg Schools Foundation as well for 6 years, which has provided some additional money to the Twinsburg Schools Foundation. So in addition to some rebates that we get in return for our beverage purchases. So we get a decent, well over $10,000 a year from Dr. Pepper Snapple Group.
Excellent.
And they're a local business, which really
Oh,
helps.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Travis?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes. And that item passes 4-0. Next is miscellaneous. Do we have anything for miscellaneous?
Just a quick comment. I know I've personally and publicly congratulate you, the two of you, on a very well done campaign this fall, but I just want to officially welcome both of you to the board as our colleagues, and I really look forward to the good stuff that you bring to the board. So officially, welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark and Tina, for leading us.
Ditto. Just happy to, I know that I made the remarks in my president's report, but, kind of welcoming our families back virtually, and the extent to which we're not able to be on campus. I've seen a lot of activity on social media with respect to the experience that our kids are having virtually, and it's not the same as being here in person, obviously, But, you know, I just want to give kudos to the families for sticking with us during this difficult time, and also for the staff really moving and pivoting on a dime with pulling together the lesson plans and making sure that the lessons, you know, are interactive and, you know, as fun as possible for students, so that the experience is as good as possible to get us through this stretch until we can get, you know, till we can get our students back in the building.
I'll say to that, with my kids going virtual, I can see the difference, especially from the previous year, where I really don't have to do much with my kids. They're 6th grade and 4th grade, and they're on the cameras the whole time, and you know, they come out to go down to the basement for gym and, you know, run around, whatever, but you know, they're self-efficient, and the teachers are doing a really good job with, you know, doing the instruction and then going to their specials and being able, my son went downstairs and played the bass for music, you know, like, so, you know, it's nice, and I think it's, you know, it's working out really well. And thanks to the teachers who take the time out to make sure that they're focused and doing what they need to do on camera.
And I'll just ditto the kids running around with Jim. We've had a flute and a drum going during band classes, so, and I agree, even the high school too. On the day home last year, I was monitoring, it's the time to start the third period. Are we on third period? I haven't really had to do that. They seem to have fallen into pace with it, and I credit the teachers for that. I really do think that they have set the students up for success, and that they're working through their work with the students to keep them engaged and keep them going. So I applaud the teacher, staff, and everyone else in the district that's come together to make all this happen. It's been good. Maybe not perfect, but we've got our kids going to school.
Awesome. All right, well, moving on to item L, executive session. We do have a need to enter into executive session. So the Board of Education will enter into executive session at 7:55 to discuss consideration of the appointment of a public official and to discuss the employment and compensation of public employees as per Board of Education Policy 0166A. I will make the motion to go into executive session. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Davis. Mr. Aho, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Crawford?
Yes.
Mrs. Travis?
Yes.
Okay. We are now in executive session. I do not anticipate that we will have further business once we reconvene. So thank you, and have a good evening for all of those who are able to join us online.